So we're gonna throw plates, and instead of trying to center 10 pounds of clay total, we're gonna center 5 pounds and then 5 pounds on top. So you always wanna start with your ball of clay in a ball, in a sphere shape. And from there, you start to slowly spin the wheel and just pat the clay down. And spin it a little bit quicker to see where it might be off center, and push it a little bit closer to the middle. This helps to spread the clay out, and it also can help with centering. Once you've gotten it spread out a bit, then you want to go ahead and start centering that piece of clay. So you will see me hyperextend my wrist, which I generally try not to do, but given the amount of clay, you kind of have to do that to be able to get it centered on the wheel. And the areas that you need to focus on primarily are the center and the sides. So I use quite a bit of pressure from my top hand, pushing down, and then spreading the clay out towards the edge of the bat. You always have to throw your plates on bats, otherwise you will not be able to pick it up off the wheel. To add the second piece of clay, you need the center of your dome to be the highest point on your mound of clay. So right now I've kind of got a dip, so I'm trying to actually move the clay from here into the center. If you have a dip in the middle, you will trap an air hole. So this mound of clay is centered enough for me to go ahead and add on the other piece. Before you do that, you need to use your metal rib and get the slurry off of the clay. If your tool bites in, you've got to smooth that out. Any little dip or divot in that clay as you add the other piece on top will create an air bubble. Okay. So you stop the wheel, get your next piece of clay, and pat that into a ball. Once you've got it into a sphere shape, aim for the middle and drop your clay. Then you do the same thing where you slowly spin the wheel. You know, if it's off center a bit, just kind of muscle it around until it's a little bit more centered on top of the other mass of clay. And just start patting again. Obviously, we need to be careful of this area here where this clay is meeting this clay. We don't want to trap air bubbles. We want to be focusing that pressure on moving that clay towards this mound of clay so that it transitions into the other piece without trapping any air bubbles. So you're ready to start centering this piece of clay when you've got like kind of a 1/4 of an inch of a lip right there. You know, any more than that, you're really going to increase your chances of trapping air. So with the plates, you need to, just like with bowls, you need to have clay that is going to support the entire underside of your plate, but also where it transitions into a rim. So you need your base of clay to be fairly wide and fairly thick. So you can see from this angle here that there's no longer a seam. Those smooth together seamlessly. So my plate is probably going to be anywhere from 14 to 15 inches in diameter. And remember that you want your foot ring to be about 2/3 the diameter of that. So when you're making your clay pad, really make sure that you're centering it out far enough. The last thing you want to do is have too narrow of a base and then go ahead and make the lip of your plate and have it sag and fall down because you didn't give enough support underneath. Okay, so now I'm centered and I want to open the plate. When you open a plate, you really don't go very deep at all. You can see I've probably gone down about 1.5 inches. The trick to moving that clay out so that you pull it into a wall, this little bit of clay is going to want to pop up as I'm pulling the clay out. So it's this balance between pulling the clay out and pushing this part right here down. And then maintaining the centeredness of the entire mass of clay while doing so. So this hand right here is containing this bit. If I don't do that, that area pops right up and then it's kind of determining the rim for you. It limits your options later. Plates need a lot of compression. It's a big, wide open area that you're gonna have to trim against. So you want to spend a significant amount of time moving your sponge or your rib or both from the center out to the wall, even as you're opening that form. I do have an air bubble in there. Hopefully I can pop it as I'm doing that opening. If not, air bubbles become highly visible in plates because everything else is relatively flat. So if you do happen to get an air bubble in your clay, take your pin tool and pop it, and then go over the surface with a rib again. Plates can have various contours on the interior, right? They can be flat across with a very articulated rim. They can be very smooth and very shallow, and all of the different shapes in between. So do have some kind of idea of what kind of contour you want to have on the inside of your plate before you go ahead and start pulling up those walls. If I want to have a very shallow dish, right now I've got a plate that's pretty flat across. So I would have to dip in here a little bit more to get that transition so that it's a little bit smoother out. The throwing of the plate is not, it doesn't take a very long time. There's not much to throw. The focus of your time is going to be spent on wedging the clay, centering the clay, opening the clay, and compressing the inside bottom. The wall, which ends up being the rim, is only a pull or two, and there's not much clay to work with. So that's the last part that you do, and it's pretty quick to pull your rim or your lip. Okay, so we all know about using a metal rib. It can catch and tear. So as you're using your metal rib on your plate, make sure that you're flexing it. You're holding it about halfway down and you're allowing the rib to flex underneath your fingers, and you don't have the sharp edges down, right? your metal rib has these corners on them. It's got one rounded side and one flat side. Make sure that the flat side is the side that you're holding. Okay, so the metal rib does the job very well, and your wooden rib also works. You just don't have the flexibility to it, which can help you if you're having trouble getting an even floor. Okay, so this is pretty much all I'm gonna do for the interior, and now I'm gonna start pulling the rim. Be careful not to pull too much from out here too quickly. You're going to have to use some of that clay, but if you pull too much from there too quickly, remember that this ultimately is your base that supports the entire rim. And so if you're narrowing that, if you're pulling from here and you're narrowing your base, you're limiting your options, and your rim might end up flopping over. For a plate this size, you want to have a lip thickness of, you know, anywhere from a heavy 1/4 of an inch to a shy 1/2 an inch. And centrifugal force starts to really play a part at this stage in throwing a plate. So you need to slow your wheel down. So like I said, once you get to throwing the rim, there's really not a whole lot to it. You're gonna do 2, maybe 3 pulls, and then start refining your surfaces. Figuring out what kind of edge you want to have on your plate, how much you want that edge to lay down, all of the design decisions. So I'm just splitting the rim there as part of a design decision. It's not something that you have to do. It's just something you can think about incorporating. And now I'm going to decide whether I want to have kind of an articulated rim or a smooth transition from the interior of the plate into the rim and the lip. So this would be considered a smooth transition, where there's really no differentiation between the interior space and the rim of the plate or the platter. If I wanted to articulate that space, you still use the same tool, but don't smooth over the transition that you begin to make. Now I already have laid down the lip of the plate pretty significantly. You can't throw a plate that has a totally, you know, like a 90-degree angle between the lip and the interior of the plate. There has to be some angle up to it, otherwise it will fall in the kiln, because it's just going to be completely unsupported. It's supported now because of the mass of clay that's underneath it, but you will trim some of that away. I'm just doing some fine tuning. I'm trying to smooth out that line right there, which, if I continue to press down in that area right now, I'm probably going to lose the plate, because there's a lot of rim and not a lot of anything else supporting it. So I'm just going to kind of call it done. And I can probably utilize another creative decision in my glazing process to kind of conceal that line there, okay? Rather than trying to work that out. As I am working on the rim, I have my tool on the top and I have my hand on the underside of it. You still have to support both sides of the wall there. That's your plate. Now, when you go to cut this off, you have your bat down there. Take your splash pan off, because you need all of that access to make sure that you drag your wire tool fully underneath the plate here. If you keep your splash pans on, they impede your movement, and a lot of times you'll end up lifting up the wire tool and cutting through the edge of your plate. So look before you cut. Make sure that your hands and the wire tool is squarely placed on the bat and that you're not cutting in an upward motion. A little bit of slurry here in the middle. I just need to get out. I just sloshed the camera person full of clay water. So, sorry. Okay, and there's your plate. Now, you need to let this dry. Depending on the weather, depending on heat being used in the studio, generally speaking though, you could leave this uncovered on your shelf overnight and be able to come in the morning and flip it. Remember that when you flip it, you leave it like this, you put another bat on top and just sandwich it and flip it over. Don't lift this up because you will warp it. Also remember that if you use a plastic bat to throw on, it's not pulling any water and it's not helping to dry the bottom. So your drying time may increase if you're using a plastic bat.